Head on over to G2A and enter Kami's Crystal Cave to get some sweet deals on crystals and more. Remember to click on the lowest price and use the promo code KamiVS to get the best deal. G2A. What's going on, everyone? Kami here, and we've got a new patch coming out, the Pirate's Treasure Update. Get that booty, girl. Now this patch is going to have some balance tweaks, a new game mode, and of course, skins. Nice. I'm not going to be going over the skins, but I mainly want to focus on the things that I feel like are need to know. These are big changes to me. As a side note, the play screen is going to be updated, so it's going to look a little different, and we'll check that out in another video when I actually get into the BTS and try it out. So, the new game mode, King of the Hill. It's technically a variant of the Onslaught queue. It's what you'd expect. A point spawns at a location, and for the next minute and 30 seconds, you try to capture it. You get points standing on top of it. It can be contested by the enemy team, and you essentially just have to fight them off. Now, I like this a lot more than Onslaught. I'm gonna take a quick second to talk about how people have told me, why don't you ever play TDM? Why don't you ever play Onslaught? Or, do you miss Payload? My answer to that question is no. And here's my reason why. Onslaught, TDM, and Payload all centralize around one singular point. The whole game. And that can get boring after playing it for a while. The difference in King of the Hill, which I'm very excited about, is it essentially makes you take different paths and different lines of sight to capture certain points. So a position might be good at one of the King of the Hill locations, but not so good at another. It makes you mix it up, and that's why I like Siege so much, because you have the capture the point type of mentality, and then you have the pushing the payload or defending the payload, and I like that type of dynamic gameplay. The King of the Hill variant is going to be available on Snowfall Junction, Trade District, Marauders Point, and Magistrate's Archive. And for your console gamers out there, you can now disable aim assists with gyro controls. Personally for me, I need all the aim assists I can get on the console.
Shaolin, why are you pushing with no life? Is it because I can't aim? You son of a bitch!
On to balance, there is a general change to a lot of the champions' ultimates. It makes it so you can't waste their ultimate. As in, if you were to start it and get killed as you're starting it up, you would lose it, where now, it does not take your ultimate charge until the pre-fire has completed. For people out there that are terrible with ultimates, me, I'm ecstatic about this. This is going to affect Androxus, Grok, Ruckus, and Vivian. Not only that, but Androxus now refunds 15% of his ultimate charge for each shot not consumed. And Fernando can now cancel his immortal ability early, his ultimate. I don't see this being useful in many situations, but in niche scenarios where you just need it for a quick second, like a dragon punch coming at you, this can allow you to tap it, absorb the punch, and get out of it to help your team burst down the Drogoz before he bursts away. Before I get into the rest of the balance / changes for all the champions, there's a certain aspect change on a lot of champions, and I wanted to go over exactly what it means. That way I could just reference it every time it comes up. So for Cassie, her dodge roll got increased momentum carry after dodge roll ends. What does that mean? Well, what it doesn't mean is that your dodge roll goes farther. No. It refers to the momentum after the ability ends. So if you're going to be doing a roll off of a high ground, the momentum doesn't stop so much after the ability ends. Moving on to Dredge, he got a pretty big nerf. His reload projectile damage went from 1,000 to 850, that's a pretty big one. And his Kraken, his ultimate, note says removed pre-fire timing, ability now deploys at crosshair on use. If you were moving and you hit your ultimate, it doesn't really come out right away. There's a little bit of floating time after you hit it and where it actually goes on. So if you were to snap to a location, hit your ult and snap away, it might actually deploy it halfway through you snapping away for where you thought you were gonna ult. This makes it a little bit more precise. And the big change is reduce the time to deploy from 2 seconds to 1.7 seconds, that's a buff, but reduce the damage by 2,600, went from 4,000 to 1,400. That's huge. And it increased the knockback by 10%, which I heard they said they're going to increase the knockback on that. 10% does not seem that much. I don't know if 0.3 seconds can actually justify a 2,600 damage nerf, unless you really think 0.3 seconds off of this ultimate's going to make that big of a difference. But honestly, overall, Dredge got a pretty big nerf. And between you and me, I'm okay with it. Now, Drogo's got a buff and a nerf to a talent, but overall, I think it was a pretty big nerf in a way that's going to help a lot of people's frustrations. So his booster and his base kit got his base effectiveness bumped up by 25%. That's what Wormjets used to do. It was just shifted from the talent to the base ability. The big note is Wormjets no longer increases booster regeneration rate. So trying out the combustible talent, we'll just choose the default loadout. If I were to try to stay up in the air as long as possible, you're going to see that we have to use a decent amount of our thruster, but our regeneration on our thruster is really bad. But now we switch over to Wormjets and you can see how fast our generation goes up just by thrusting a split second and letting go. It's what really allows the Wormjets Drogoz to stay up in the air and on top of rooftops and be an absolute menace to everyone on the other team. Wormjets by far is the #1 talent being used right now, at least from my experience, and this change is definitely going to lower the amount of people wanting to play it. This does in turn buff the other talents, so if you're a good Drogoz player, I'd say give it a try. I know know I will be. Not that I'm a good Drogoz player. And again, between you and me, I'm okay with this nerf. Fernando received what I could call an overall buff, reducing the cooldown of his shield by 3 seconds, but also reducing the maximum active time by 2 seconds. Honestly, a lot of times with Fernando, you're not really holding up your shield the maximum amount of time. It's either blown up before the maximum time, or you're dropping it because you don't need it and you want the cooldown to start up as fast as possible. So the shield change, to me, is an overall buff. A decently good one. The charge, the increased momentum, okay. And Towering Barrier, a new loadout card, reduces the cooldown of your shield by 0.8 seconds. Fernando's not being played that much, so I think he deserves this buff. He's never been known to be really mainly about his shield. He's been known to be about his aggressive playstyle, and people haven't been that willing to adapt to being more of an actual tank. So I don't know how much it's actually going to help Fernando, but overall, I do think it is a solid buff for him. Amani received a buff in 2 different main aspects. One, her Pyro Ball makes it so her in-hand offset for charged Pyro Balls will always release to the right of your reticle instead of potentially releasing to the left and clipping walls. Now in layman's terms, this means that she rotates between her left and her right when she shoots her fireballs. So if you're kind of near a wall like this, only half your fireballs are going to be going through, and it forces you to be out more in the open, making you more susceptible to being shot. What I'm really confused about is the fact that they did not decide to change this for her Frost form. This has been something I've always been griping about, and I've maybe even joked that this is the way that they balance Amani, forcing her to be out more in the open when she wants to shoot all of her shots. But the fact that they changed it for the Fireball and not the ice, I don't know if that's actually intended or they haven't gotten around to changing the ice form yet. The other change is to her Inferno Cannon. Players now move during this ability at base. The movement is equivalent to Swift Seer 3. So that means if I take this random loadout I just built and put Swift Seer at 3, switch over to Fire, this is what you're going to look to move at base movement speed for Amani on Swift Seer. That feels really good, considering the old base movement speed with no cards put into it is you can't move. And you can actually put points still into the card, putting her, I think it says 20%? Yes, when max, this card will provide a 20% more movement speed than the previous iteration. Honestly, I don't think it really needs that much, maybe made for a meme build. You don't really need to put anything to Swift Seer now, and you can use another loadout card in place of it. A buff? Io had a pretty big change. Her Moonlight no longer breaks on immediate loss of sight, but instead has a small window before the link breaks. Now, as many of you know, this was a huge complaint I had with IO, so if I were to be healing this Fernando and I break line of sight, it immediately cuts it off. So it's going to feel really good to be able to weave in and out of the corners and just lines of sight in general, especially when your tanks don't know exactly where the heal is coming from. It just really depends on what type of window we're talking about. Are we talking 0.5 seconds? Are we talking 1 second? Something I'm definitely going to be playing in the PTS to try out. Overall buff. Khan had his commander's grab with the increased momentum, blah, 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 blah. Koga has slightly increased base movement speed, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but I think it will when it comes down to a Cyclone Strike being able to keep up with people. Cyclone Strike being his ultimate. Speaking of Cyclone Strike, he now remains immune until Cyclone Strike has finished. Seems good to me. Now the Shadow Step with the increased momentum carry, I think can actually be something noticeable for Koga. There's a couple other champions like Maeve coming up, I think this will also be noticeable, but the fact that both of them can get up in the air when they use their Shadow Step, or when Maeve uses her pounds, getting ahead of myself here, but increase the momentum carries and becoming up for Maeve, it might allow them to get farther across the map in between each move, especially with Shadow Step. It could be a pretty big deal. Whereas with Khan, you're not going to notice the increased momentum carry. I could be 100% wrong here. It could apply to ground movement speed and just how much movement speed you have after the ability ends, which would be really nice, but I still think that Koga and Maeve are definitely going to feel it a lot more than Khan would. But overall for Koga and Maeve, buffs. Maybe a big deal, maybe not even that big of a deal. Maldaba had the increased momentum carry after Slither ends. Again, maybe a big deal, maybe not. And Pip did have a huge buff. Combat Medic weapon shots now heal allies for 750 instead of 600. That's a big deal. I actually have a video coming out very soon where I play Combat Medic so I can have a reference before, and then when I play it after, I can compare the buff. And another card that's getting buffed, well, might not seem a buff to some people, but I think it's a huge buff, is Pep in the Step, which currently increases the movement speed by either 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50% for 1.5 seconds. And I think it's been dismissed by a lot of players because it's only 1.5 seconds, but now the duration is being doubled while the actual movement speed game is being nerfed by about 40%. That's pretty good. Keep in mind though, there's a lot of good loadout cards for Pip, so this might be kind of hard to squeeze in there. But 3 seconds from 1.5 seconds I think is a huge buff to the card, and Combat Medic just got a flat out increase in healing per shot. We might see some more Combat Medic pips, and if we're seeing more pips, Kami's happy. Ruckus is also receiving the buff of the momentum carry after his advance ends. This could, in theory, increase the effectiveness of aerial assault, which was my favorite talent to use with him. But again, we'll have to see when the patch comes out. Now, Strix received a pretty big nerf on 2 loadout cards. Roost, which used to increase his damage reduction while aiming down the scope was now changed to hits on players with Talon Rifle grant 2% ultimate charge, scaling all the way up to 10%. Now that's pretty good, like 10% ultimate charge per hit plus the normal amount of ult charge you would get per shot. I mean, we're looking at least at maxed out 13% per shot. That's pretty good. But considering how good Roost is and the fact that Strix's ult isn't really that game changing, it was a nerf. And on top of this Roost change, Dexterous also had its reduced effectiveness from 20% per, which is the one that allows you to quick switch faster to your pistol, from 10% per. That also is a very big nerf, and I think that's amazing considering when you get Dexterous up to about 60%, you could essentially shoot someone, hold Q, and right click and get a flare out for an instantaneous, just massive amount of damage. And his damage burst was toned down with this loadout card change. Strix nerf, but I approve. These next two changes I'm sure a lot of people are going to be happy about. The talents for Torvald Field Study reduced the damage increase from 30% to 15%. People hate the burst meta, this is reducing it. Torvald is still incredibly annoying to play against when he just runs around and pocket shields a DPS, but with Field Study not giving as much damage boost, hopefully it'll be a little less annoying. I wouldn't be surprised if Thanks Grandpa started getting picked like it used to over Field Study. And on to more damage burst nerfs. Hunter's Mark from Tyro was reduced in its cooldown by 1 second, which doesn't really seem like a nerf on that, and it also reduced the duration by a second. But Hunting Party no longer further increases the damage amp, and it removed the cooldown reduction. Hunting Party essentially just allows your other team to take advantage of the damage amp. Now, while the damage amp part is definitely being toned down, she did get a buff with Favored Quarry. At least I consider it a buff. Increase the duration of Hunter's Mark by 0.6 seconds. It currently is 1 second, but it also just increases the reveal duration for the time. The fact that the card now increases just the flat out duration of Hunter's Mark definitely offsets the initial nerf coming into the base kit, but it also pairs really well with other loadout cards like the ones that give you increased movement speed while Hunter's Mark is up. If Hunting Party is still going to be used, I definitely think the Favored Quarry and the increased movement speed while Hunter's Mark is up are going to be a staple in those loadouts. Overall, I still think Tyra is going to be fine, but with the nerf to Hunting Party, it's going to make people not feel so awful going up against it. Down to the last two changes. Ying, Life Exchange, remove inaccuracy on Shatter. Oh, this is low-key my favorite change of the patch. This just means when you jump and you right-click, you won't have inaccuracy. There's so many other abilities I wish they would do this for, but I'm glad that they're doing it for Ying. And lastly, Zen, increase the momentum carry after whirl. Again, could be something big, could maybe not. Overall, I'm pretty happy with these changes. I don't have too many qualms about it, other than I'd like to see some additional changes on toning down certain champions. Tanks feel really strong, they do a lot of damage, maybe a little bit too much damage, and Cassie still feels pretty nutty to me. I do want to make a quick note that the Ying change, Strix change, Pip change, the Amani change, and the Drogoz change all have the Assembly of Champion icon next to it, which means they had a huge influence with these changes, and I like all of these changes that the AOC had influence over. So thanks, guys. Let me know what you think about this new patch down in the comments. I'm excited to get into the PTS when it comes out very soon, and I'll get you some gameplay, and overall, we can look at some new skins, we can look at the overall UI change. I'm excited. For now, I'm gonna head out of here. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm not gonna be one of those people who asks you to like and subscribe, so I'm not gonna ask.